but one thing that I think is really important to touch on again is like the history of salsa, because you lived through and are continuing to live through an incredibly transitional stage of the scene that we live in and scene that we enjoy, like on a day-to-day basis. Like, is there anything that you feel like dancers should be aware of that they're not getting enough information about now in regards to history?
Yeah, I mean, they should know who the musicians are that they dance to, where they come from. I think that they should definitely tap into salsa in terms of when the term was being used and why the transition went from mambo to salsa, that kind of thing. If you're thinking about the dance itself,
Yeah.
the dance itself, I'm not talking about the music, because the music has evolved since the 30s, 40s, 50s. We all know the influence from Cuba. We all know how we got to New York, the big band sound. We understand that, and a lot of people are more interested in hearing the music part of it historically. That's good. I mean, don't get me wrong. You should absolutely know who you're dancing to, right? But I also don't think that they don't know anything about the dancers that danced during the 50s or 40s. Like, they don't know who these people are.
You're talking about like Cuban Pete and these sorts of dancers?
Cuban Pete, Millie Domay, Augie and Margot Rodriguez, Mike Terrace, Francois Zoni. I can go on. There's just a slew of dancers that danced in the Palladium that had influenced everything that came out of there. Some of them went through the social dance scene and kept just hanging out in clubs and teaching. The ballroom scene, their mambo in the ballroom competition scene comes from the Palladium. They took the steps and they structured them, and then they said, okay, this is what we're going to compete mambo in. Of course, it's kind of difficult to see mambo in today's competition environment when they do it in ballroom.
Right.
Business evolved, it's become more theatrical. It's just different. It's not any better or worse.
Right.
It's just different in what they're looking for. They're looking for speed and rhythm and those things. It's less social than anything else. It's very competitive. But at the time when they took it, and they had New Yorkers in the Palladium. They had, when I say New Yorkers, the actual step.
Right.
And they had all these things, and I think the dancers today don't look into who those dancers were, how they influenced. You go to Puerto Rico, how the dancers in Puerto Rico influenced them, and so forth and so on. They just don't do enough of that. I mean, there were kids in the scene right now that think that they created things. There are actual kids that actually, like, when they compete in a cabaret and all of a sudden the audience is going ballistic over a move, let's say, when the move had been around for 60 years.
Yeah. Okay.
But because their lack of information, right, or their interest in trying to find the information, right, they create this thing and all of a sudden they think that they created it. Come on, man. There's so many of those things going on that I kind of feel like, and I do what I can. I share and I talk to people every time I get an opportunity to, but they really should go out. There are books. I mean, Augie and Margo has a book on themselves. I mean, you can Google a lot of these people. I mean, Cuban Pete was around for a really long time, and he influenced a lot of people also. It's just, that's the part of the scene that I think that they need to nurture more of who came before them, and as far as dance is concerned, of course, the music, because everybody's always talking about music. It's funny how you're in the dance community, and instead of discussing, the dance, you're discussing music. And I get it. Don't get me wrong. You're dancing to this music. Of course, I grew up, look, my mother had the big three in my living room. So me waking up to Tito Puente, Machito, Tito Rodriguez, Gran Combo that's normal. This was my everyday. This is the culture every day.
Yeah.
You know, the dance part of it, my mom did what she best because, you know, my mom is Puerto Rican. And so she dances on three, so to speak. You know, so we you know, do whatever, you know, we flick our feet and go back. But it was so much fun. And it was in the living room, and that's the culture and that whole thing. I get that, right? But you know, you go into a dance studio and, you know, they got congas and they got you know, the sticks, and they got everything in there, acting like musicians. And, you know, you're a dancer. Talk about dance. Let's get the history of dance going. Let's talk about some of those old timers that left you the steps. You understand?
Yeah,
Try to
yeah.
get that a little. I see that all the time. I mean, I go to studios sometimes to teach, let's say, and they got all the instruments, and they're talking about clave, and they're talking about this, and they're talking about that, and I watch them and says, okay, so where does that step come from? You know, and they have no idea. They don't even know what the name is, some of them. You understand? They just don't know, and it's just like, okay, you know, you're doing this dance, and yet you don't have a clue, you know?
Do you
Yeah.
think in that way, like, because there are obviously, like, there are a lot of steps that have names that are very universal, but we don't have the same, from my perspective, like, as far as much of learning as I've done and information that I've received, in one city they call a step one thing, and in another city they call it another thing, but we don't
Right.
really have like a universal.
I mean, there's a lot of, I mean, a Suzy Q is a Suzy Q. A 585 is a 585, right? Turn combinations. Yeah. We have broken left. You know, we have right side turn. We have those things are universal. But then all of a sudden, you know, you get these other steps, and they give them whatever name they want.
Yeah.
Because it's you know, it could be a lot of reasons. I mean, the studio owner decides they want to have their own syllabus, or they want to have their own structure of the way they feel they want to teach it. You know, stuff like that. It's not as, you're right, it's not as structured, but, you know, we have sources, you know, Eddie Torres, Tito, you know, and on the on one, you got Johnny, Francisco, Sosa, you know, they all basically talk the same lingo. You know, everything I teach comes from New York, so I'm going to use the language they use in New York, or always have.
Yeah.
Which to some extent, I think that's what everybody should do. Because it comes from, you know, it comes from one or two or three places, right?
Yeah,
you know, it's either New York, Puerto Rico, Cuba, you know, so then why don't you call it that? Why do you have to make up your own steps?
Yeah.
You know,
do you feel like there should be...
That's the problem that's been going on for a long time.
Yeah, you know? That's right. Do you feel like there should be like a universal terminology for it? Because in Australia we have terms for certain things. Like, I feel like in the ballroom world and in like the ballet world, this is what it is, undisputed. Like, this is,
well, that's been around long. They've been around. Let's ballet is 400 plus years. You know, ballroom is 100 plus years. So it's standardized. It's organized. It has a governing body. Yeah. It has people willing to work together for the betterment of the community, right? Yeah. In this community, we have a lot of really independent thinkers that feel that what they do is, you know, better than everybody else. Right. And they also lack, in my opinion, you know, when you have a community that's not willing to listen to the hierarchy, or not willing to listen to their older statesmen, so to speak, that's where the problem comes up. If you got a bunch of young kids, 20-something, 30-something, I call that young, establishing their own. They're saying, you know, we're going to do it this way because this is the way I do it, and I got a following, so I'm going to do it this way. Well, you know, how much respect are you giving to the people behind you, the people that established to open up the doors for you, have this community established? That's what you got. I mean, I've tried to sit down with several people from around the world to establish some form of alliance. Right. I've gotten so far as had minutes signed up. I mean, you know, written up, and have meetings discussing all kinds of different things that are going on in the salsa scene. And then there's no follow through. And then, of course, I feel like I'm the only, you know, I'm a piper with nobody behind me. You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
Ridiculous. And then you have these conflicts of ego. You know, everybody coming into a room and believing that, you know, they're the greatest things since sliced bread, and everybody's got to, you know, listen to them.
Yeah.
You know, it's ridiculous. I mean, you know, it's sad, so to speak, because I'll give you, for instance, the World Games have added salsa to the competition, to the World Games. Now you have to understand, the World Games is right underneath the Olympics.
Right.
Okay, every 4 years they have the World Games. Well, about 12 years ago, they added salsa. They added salsa because they were bringing the World Games to Colombia. You see how your eyes blew up? Like
Yeah.
is this the first time you're hearing this?
That's the first time I've heard that.
Watch this story. It's incredible to me.
Okay.
So this just to show you the dysfunctionality that's going on in the salsa scene in terms of not being included.
Right.
You understand? So Colombia was hosting the World Games that particular year.
Okay.
And their national sport they decided that their national sport would be salsa. Now, the governing body, I'm not going to mention the governing body, comes from the ballroom world that has the link with the World Games. So they host the salsa championships for the World Games in Colombia. Now, of course, Colombia has representation. Jefferson and Anita and several others that come from there. Of course, Italy had representation because Italy has the IDO, International Dance Association, which, by the way, has a lot of real salseros. You know, salseros that are in our world that we recognize and that are also compete in the FITS and the other organizations in Italy.
Right.
Okay. And they have a lot of European countries that have governing bodies that have connected with salsa, so to speak. But the level is very bad. It's not representation of our community. So now in the United States, I had to call the president of the Amateur Association here because he was in charge. Who made him in charge? I have no idea. You know, you have the Latin Cup, you have the World Salsa Summit that are hosted in the United States. Clearly, we know who the best salseros are in the world, and we probably could come with representation for whatever country you're looking for to make this World Game really happen in terms of real salseros, right? No way. They hosted that qualifier for the United States in a ballroom event in California.
Really?
Yeah. Katie had to go judge it. I went to Canada to go to a Congress. I said, I'm not going to be a part of that, you know. So they go there, and of course, they did not find what they wanted to find. And then they call me after the fact and say, hey, can you send us a couple? And I says, and I went like this, I said, all the couples are working. Our champions are working in some Congress somewhere. This is something that should have been discussed with me when we had the discussion a year ago.
Yeah.
You know, because I had offered them. I said, listen, I'm not interested in anything other than giving these dancers an opportunity to represent their countries. You know, at the time, our top 5 had people from Italy, we had people from Peru, we had people from everywhere. So you could have asked us, and I told you, those were representation for this and this and this. And you would have had a good, you know, the real salsa scene there. But it didn't happen. Colombia won.
Right.
Okay. Then 4 years go past again. Again, I'm just using my example. The United States does not have proper representation. We come 28th place. How does the United States come in 28th place?
Not proper representation.
It's ridiculous. You know, and this is what I mean, because we are not sitting at the table. It's because we're not organized enough for them to even recognize us. They can't take us seriously if we don't. If you know, I'm just showing you from an organization, from the governing body view, so to speak, because you know I'm a member of the National Dance Council of America here. You know, I'm a member of the World Federation. You know, so in the ballroom world, I have a sense of how they govern their body and stuff, and we don't have that. And because we don't have that, we're not included as a whole in some of these prestigious events. I mean, the World Games is a big deal. That's the step before the Olympics.
Yeah.
And the fact that you don't even know that that existed
Didn't have a clue.
is sad.
Yeah.
I mean, every salsero in the world should be okay if they're interested in competition. You know, I'm not saying that that everybody should be interested. I'm just saying for those that want to be interested in competition and want to know what's going on with the world of salsa, that's an opportunity lost.
Before you prepare to perform, do you have a warm-up regime that you go through to like get your body ready to perform or compete? Or
that came in stages. Every decade that changes. When I was a kid, I would just show up 20 minutes before, you know, warm up, split, do some things, push-ups, demi-plie, do a little bar work, and then I'm ready. I didn't even run it. I would just go and perform it. You know, I didn't even run it. Because I was doing one-nighters. You know, I would get in a car and we'll drive to a hotel in the Catskills, the Poconos, and we'll just do one-nighters. Or we'll go to a club. They're not going to give you any rehearsal time. They're not going to give you any of that. You know, I'm an opening act. I'm not the star. You know, and you know, we're usually the acts that go before the star. They used to call them opening acts. They don't even have them anymore, I don't think. But I did that when I was a kid. As I got older, my warm-up became longer.